Hello, I'm John T. Boston II, and I want to talk to you about the culture of evangelism. Right now, I'm serving at the Adventist Theological Seminary, the North American Division Evangelism Institute. And in that role, I get to support pastors and leaders and churches in the field. But at the same time, I'm supporting students that are retooling themselves to serve in critical ministry roles across North America and really around the world. But before I was serving in this place, I was a pastor evangelist. As a matter of fact, there were years where I struggled with the notion that these two things could work together, but I have found that they're really inextricable. You can't separate them, kind of like Daniel in Revelation. And I want to talk to you about a context I worked in about 4 years ago in Columbus, Ohio. I served there. I served in Central Georgia, in Atlanta, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and in Australia, where I was a conference evangelist for a couple of years, and I served as a pastor of a local church there. And so I've been pastor longer than anything in my ministry experience. And one thing I have found is that this idea of evangelism has taken on so many different meanings that sometimes we lose the import of what it's really all about. This is who we are. We are called to this impossible mission of growth. Go and change the world, tell the world, prepare the world. And so how do you create a culture of evangelism in a cultural context where evangelism is in some instances a bad word? I know this idea, it's associated, it connotates this notion of a tent or an event or a point in time where we begin and end. Well, what if evangelism in your local church never stopped? When I was pastoring in Columbus, Ohio, and the same was true in Australia, and I support churches right now all across the North American division, there is this idea that I have, and it sounds crazy, but what if evangelism never stopped? What if Sabbath school were evangelistic and Pathfinders and our Adventist youth program? What if our social media initiatives and presence online were evangelistic? Well, I want to tell you how that can be. I want to tell you that right now across North America, there are churches like Pastor Nick Coute in Tulsa, Oklahoma, recently named conference evangelist for the Oklahoma Conference. There, he has a culture of evangelism. Or my good friend, Pastor Samuel Adjei in Columbus, Ohio, at the Columbus Ghanaian English service. That he's nurturing an environment where evangelism just doesn't stop. Pastor Colby Mayer over in Oregon, Portland, same thing. I could give multiple examples, but I want to begin right now to underscore what it means to create this culture. Well, first and foremost, in Columbus, what we did, and this is what you've got to do, you've got to align your core values. Identify and align your core values. In Columbus, the city had a hard time with childhood mortality and childhood poverty, too high for a city its size, really. And so our church had a heart for caring for children, but the members of the church largely wanted to care for the children of the church. Then I have a core value of public evangelism, specifically proclamation. I believe that everything the church does should be about proclaiming the love and second coming of Jesus Christ and all of the promises encapsulated in those two ideas. And so here I had to take my ideal, my value of evangelism, the church's heart to care for children, and the city's need to mitigate childhood poverty. And so what we did was we began feeding children from the city on Sabbath mornings, and that became, in essence, our children's church, a first service of sorts. It became our number one soul-winning ministry. From that, the Pathfinder ministry would be our number two. And how did that work? Was we advertised our Pathfinders as a mentoring initiative. And so the public school system sent children our way. The state funded our Pathfinder ministry. What I'm really trying to point out is that if I had come in as a pastor and I said, this is what I want to do, I want to run a meeting for 4 weeks in the summer, we wouldn't have experienced the unprecedented growth that we experienced there. 100 and 87 decisions for baptism. Persons baptized or transferred their membership from another Bible-believing church in 3 years. How did that happen? It happened because everything we did centered around evangelism. We did it in those 3 ways. Identify the value of the city. The city made clear what they needed based on where their funding was going, the mayor's page, the city's website, then the value of the church. The church had a value of nurturing children, and we needed to expand that. As a pastor, my value is evangelism, and so we needed all of those values to intersect. And when that happens, you will nurture and facilitate critical mass. Now, that's how you do it. That's what we did. But let's unpack that a little bit more. What about the other ministries of the church? We began to adjust our local church budget based on the effectiveness of the ministries that we were engaged in. Our Sabbath school programs, for instance, on Sabbath mornings, our Sabbath school leaders knew that if you did not have on a regular basis non-members in your Sabbath school class, you were fostering a club and not an evangelistic initiative. And for that reason, we began to dissolve classes and reopen new Sabbath school classes to make sure that our classes always reflected non-members in them. That's one small initiative that took time to get to that place. I asked each of my elders if they would consider being a part of the soul winning ministry of the church. It's very difficult to lead a church or to have leaders in a church, any organization really, who are not modeling what you're asking everyone to do. How could I ask everyone to be a soul winner if the core leaders of the church are not soul winners? How could I ask everyone to be excited about growth culture in the local church if the core leaders of the church were not? So that was key. In our board meetings, we actually discussed the names of persons that made decisions. I support this in churches across North America right now. And what I'm suggesting to you, the primary work of the board is the planning of evangelism, the organizing the church for evangelism. And so in the board meeting, if the bulk of the meeting is on finance or the renovation project or the rebuilding, building a building project, you're in trouble. You want to make sure that every board meeting, the bulk of emphasis is based on the effective, efficient propagation of the gospel, like my teacher, Dr. James Doggett, used to say. That's what we had to do. So that means in our board meetings, we're discussing John and Tim and Tom and Jose and Ivan, and we're looking at the names of these young men and these young women, and we're rehearsing how are we connecting with them. And so here, this is the most critical thing. If you remember only 2 things, remember aligned core values, and remember this: you need to identify your connection points. Where we often measure the success of an evangelistic meeting based on how well people come to church. But what if we measure the success of our local evangelistic initiatives on how well the church connects with people where they are? How many times did we visit John in his home? How many times did we visit Carla in her home? How many times did we check in on these individuals throughout the week? And in our board meeting, we discussed that. In our elders meeting, we discussed that. I'm assigning responsibility for care. Effective care is the most valuable tool in evangelism you have. I didn't run a public campaign that started or ended in any point. As a matter of fact, from the 1st of the year to the 31st of the last month of the year, we were constantly in evangelism. We aligned our values with the needs that were present in that specific city. We didn't need to knock on a door to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we just allowed the city to let us know what need was present, and we filled that need. And at the same time, we saw unbelievable growth. The church would not stop growing. I applied that principle in Australia, totally different context. We've seen this happen in digital platforms like Max Life events right out of the Oregon conference. I'm seeing this in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You can see this right where you are. Align your core values. Know what they are for you as pastor, for the church, and for the community. Secondly, identify connection points. How well does the church connect with people? Where do people grow in our local church? And finally, After you've got those two things working for you, I want you to consider that the only thing you'll have to do next is figure out where you're going to fit all of the people that make decisions, because this is how you have a culture of evangelism.